So I wanted to turn now to the Labour leadership campaign, and Unite and its members have endorsed Rebecca Long-Bailey for their chosen candidate. What was what do you think was the motivation behind that endorsement? Because there've been conversations about how Rebecca Long-Bailey is kind of the Corbyn endorsed candidate. So does she represent Corbynism without Corbyn? And is there a question of a tension here between ideology and electoral success, or what do you think was behind it?
Okay, well, I mean, obviously the three candidates that are running for leadership are three good people. You therefore have to make a judgment. You only have one to choose, and both myself and my union's executive believe that Becky is the best placed person to take forward the message that can, in a sense, build a red bridge between the metropolitan cities where a lot of young people, professionals have been drawn to Labour, and our heartlands, the forgotten towns and cities, if you like, that still are traditional Labour areas, but who we lost in many of those areas in the last election. She's capable, extremely capable and courageous. I've dealt with her in a current role as shadow business secretary. She's developed a Green New Deal, which kind of embraces this important aspect of climate change that in particular young people are so quite rightly engaged in, but also the question about developing alternative manufacturing with investment, decent jobs and decent well-paid jobs. And so we believe that she was the best person that could carry that forward. It's interesting that Labour is always seen as the party that is concerned about low pay, about the poor, about the vulnerable, about the mental health of people. But the truth of the matter is the vast majority of the population don't fall into that category. And so Becky has that ability to, of course, be concerned about those areas, but can speak to the aspirations. She's called it aspirational socialism. What does that mean? It means that there is vast numbers of our people in our nations who are in jobs, maybe reasonably paid jobs, living in reasonable houses, but who still aspire for a better Britain. And certainly want one for their children. Now, Becky is the person who can bridge that gap and talk to our heartlands, talk about people's aspirations, whilst at the same time, of course, all of us are concerned about the vulnerable. We step over homeless people on our streets in 21st century Britain, the fifth richest nation in the world, and we still have these problems. So we have to deal with those problems, whilst at the same time dealing with people's aspirations. And Becky is the individual that we think is committed to that. There's also a loyalty aspect. Becky is the only one of the three who was loyal to the Jeremy Corbyn project. Both Lisa and Keir resigned from the shadow cabinet during that terrible uncertainty when the Parliamentary Labour Party disgracefully tried to remove Jeremy Corbyn. And that loyalty is an important thing. Ordinary people, in my experience, believe in loyalty, believe in sticking by in difficult circumstances a project or an individual. And so we felt that she had the strength to be the right person.
But because of that loyalty, do you think anything will sort of fundamentally change under Rebecca Long-Bailey? Because so far she has said that she's pretty much going to stick with the pre-existing manifesto as it was advertised last year. She hasn't identified that much in the way of changes she would make. But most people say they can't just run the exact same election campaign all over again.
Well, I mean, first of all, that goes to the point about why did we lose the election? The right-wing media and the right-wing MPs and the Labour Party are trying to say, well, it was because of Corbyn and his left-wing policies. Of course, it wasn't. It was about Brexit. That was the main reason why Labour lost the election. And they made all kinds of mistakes. They didn't lose the election in the 6 weeks of the campaign. They lost the election months and months and months ago. I predicted Boris Johnson would win with a workable majority. I didn't think it would be the landslide that it was. But once Labour abandoned its position of respecting the referendum result of 2016, then they were on a slippery slope, and it played into all kinds of issues. Played into the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was not strong enough as a leader to keep a discipline. People could say whatever they liked, whether it was Keir, whether it was Emily Thornberry or anybody else. There was just no cohesion in Labour's approach. And that led us into a situation where in our heartlands, and I've been telling the leadership of the party for over a year, maybe for 15 months before the election, that there would be consequences in our heartlands, in the North and the Midlands, if people perceived us becoming a Remain party. And that's what happened. They felt they were betrayed. And it was... Now, there are those that are saying, oh, it was Labour Party policy, it was the left-wing policy. No, it wasn't. 2.5 years ago, if I take you back to 2017, Labour came within touching distance of power with a radical manifesto. What caused the defeat this time was Brexit. Now, I can argue and point to some facts. Maybe the best fact I can point to is that the Conservative Party, Boris Johnson, has just won 44% of the popular vote. That's massive in a British election. And he won it on the basis of one policy: get Brexit done. He virtually said nothing else. He might have mentioned about police, and he might have mentioned about the NHS. But the only thing he really mentioned over and over and over again was get Brexit done. And it won him a landslide victory. So when people say that Becky is continuity Corbyn, that's offensive to her. In fact, I think there's an element of sexism involved in that argument. She's a woman in her own rights. She has her own views. And she will have her own priorities. There's no doubt that Labour's manifesto had way, way too many policies. The reason for that is it was a panic. People knew it was going to be Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. And in an attempt to try and push Brexit off the agenda, they came up with 1 or 2 policies every single day. You got to the end of the week and you couldn't remember what the policy was on Monday. It was a mistake, and it was a disaster, and it was caused because the strategy on Brexit was wrong. And Jeremy Corbyn and the leadership of the party have to take responsibility of that. Becky, Brexit is now gone. Brexit is gone. And when you look at the individual policies, and we poll our members in Unite all the time, my members in Unite are a microcosm of our society. And when we poll them about certain of the policies, whether it be public ownership of the railways or Royal Mail, they're very popular. When we talk to them about abolishing zero-hour contracts or a £10 minimum wage, they're very popular. When we talk to them about a regional investment bank investing back in communities outside of the southeast, they're popular. When we talk to them about the building of 1 million homes over a period of a parliament or maybe 2, they're very popular. So what Becky, indeed, in my view, whoever the leader is, and in particular Becky, she will prioritise things and focus things down. Brexit has gone. The argument about being in or out of Europe is now over. We are leaving the European Union. So I think those that are trying to suggest that, Becky will just be continuity Corbyn, does her a disservice. They might say she's continuity socialism. And the definition of socialism and social democracy will be defined by who she is.
Okay. There are at least some parts of the Labour Party that don't seem to be that happy about Rebecca Long-Bailey's candidacy. Margaret Hodge said several things about her yesterday. She tweeted, quoting someone who spoke at a leadership hustings in Liverpool about the Israeli lobby being responsible for Jeremy Corbyn's electoral defeat. And Margaret Hodge said, "To be clear, accusing a Jew who calls out anti-Semitism of working on behalf of Israel is both conspiratorial and anti-Semitic. Why didn't you challenge this straight away, Rebecca Long-Bailey? This is not what leadership looks like." Do you agree with Margaret Hodge?
Well, does anybody take Margaret Hodge seriously anymore? Because I certainly don't, and I certainly don't agree with her. I mean, the manner in which she behaved with Jeremy Corbyn was nothing short of disgraceful and despicable. And I've called that out at party conference, calling him a racist and an anti-Semite and bawling at him in his face. Absolutely despicable behaviour by Margaret Hodge. And fortunately, I don't think she has too much traction in the Labour Party. Of course, anti-Semitism is a huge issue. For me, all my life, it is the greatest evil in our society. And I've fought against it all my life, including physically on the streets when I was younger. And until we kick out every anti-Semite in the Labour Party, we shouldn't rest. In fact, we shouldn't rest until we kick every anti-Semite out of society. So that shouldn't be misjudged or taken as you can't criticise the Israeli government. I'm a huge critic of the Israeli government. It's the most right-wing Israeli government that I can personally remember in my life. But I'm also somebody who passionately believes in Israel's right to exist. Now, I might believe that their right to exist should be based on the 1967 Green Line, and I certainly oppose their expansion into the occupied territories. I believe in a two-state solution. I believe Palestine should be a viable state, recognised by the British government. But I believe Israel has every right to exist, and they have every right to exist without the worry of attack by surrounding Arab nations. Most Arab nations now have accepted the acceptance of Israel as a right to exist. But criticising Israel and the Israeli government, absolutely, I'll continue to criticise any right-wing government throughout this world, including Israel. But I'll also fight with every fibre in my body against anti-Semitism, and especially kicking it out the party that I've been a member of for 50 years.
Great. Just a couple last questions. The first one is, some people have talked about how the extent of Labour's defeat in December means that their rebuilding to the point of getting a majority is now a 10-year rather than a 5-year project. Do you think that's the case? Not least because Boris Johnson talked about having votes in the North lent to him, that you're doing lots of things to try and keep those votes, such as relocating parts of the civil service to the North, HS2 and that kind of thing.
Yeah, again, very good question. If I was being a realist, I would say that to actually win a majority Labour government in 4.5 years' time is incredibly difficult. We have the problem of Scotland, which used to be a Labour hotbed, and we have lost Scotland. And that is a separate argument and debate that the party needs to have. We may have lost Scotland for a generation. I have views on what we should do in Scotland. So you're really talking about winning 125 seats in England. Now, that is a huge, huge task. So realistically, it's been done before in history, in British political history. But in the current climate, as I see it, that will be difficult, especially as you make a very, very good point about Boris Johnson. I have a view about Boris Johnson. I think he's a little bit like an American president. I'm not sure he's an ideologue in that sense. American presidents get elected, and the following day, they're only interested in being elected in 4 years' time. And I think that's where Boris Johnson comes from. I think his aim in life is to be the longest serving Prime Minister, to beat Thatcher and beat Tony Blair. And therefore, investing in these heartlands, these Labour heartlands, I'm going to look with interest what he does. He's certainly making noises. Dominic Cummings, who influences him, has just got rid of Sajid Javid, because Javid, as Chancellor, wanted to control spending, whereas, if you believe what you read in the papers, Cummings and Johnson want to spend. So very, very interesting. Now, if anyone believes that the votes in our heartlands have simply been lent to the Conservative Party, then they'll be making a huge mistake in Labour, because it's a bit like crossing the Rubicon. People who would never have dreamt of voting Tory have now voted Tory. And to think that you can click your fingers and get them back would be a huge mistake. Labour have to work at getting them back. It is my view that we can do that. It's my belief that we can win those seats back. And just winning those seats back would result in a hung parliament. And of course, a hung parliament would mean a Labour government. So I believe in 4.5 years' time we will get a Labour government, but we'll have to work at it. We have to be united, whoever becomes the leader of the party. If they stick to the principles of offering a radical alternative, then I think we will be in power again. The one thing that Jeremy Corbyn's done is change the Labour Party, in my opinion, forever. Because how many times did we hear that on the doorstep and people saying there's no difference between the parties and politicians are all the same? That's no longer the case. We now have a Labour Party that offers a radical alternative to a Conservative party and a Conservative ideological government. That is a good thing for democracy. It's Labour's challenge now to make certain that that radical alternative is embraced by the electorate, and in particular back in our heartlands, as well as then trying to speak about aspirations in the rest of our nations.
Great, and just lastly, you're here this evening to talk about the role and the importance of trade unions. Do you think that trade unions are under threat today, and what do you think are the sort of key battlegrounds that they'll be facing? Well,
trade unions have been under threat since their very existence. In fact, I've written a book. It's only a thin book about why you should be a trade unionist, and in it I start off giving a short, brief history of where we came from, who we are, where we came from, and what we've achieved. And of course, right throughout that period of history, you can go back 200 years. We celebrated last August the massacre of Peterloo, where ordinary people who were demonstrating for their voice to be heard, demonstrating for representation in a democracy, were crushed and murdered by the establishment. Ever since then, our movement has been under threat and under attack as we try to do nothing more than fight for a fair share for working people and the equitable distribution of the wealth that we create. 30 odd years ago, our GDP, the wealth that we create, 65% of that, used to go in the back pocket of workers in wages. That is now down to 51%. The 14% of wealth hasn't vanished. It's just gone to the corporate elite and the super rich. Now, of course, the corporate elite and the governments who are their mouthpiece, i.e. in Britain, the Conservative government, will always attack trade unions because they don't want to share their wealth with working people. That's why we have so many anti-trade union laws in this country. It angers me, for example, that the very nation that gave they've defeated fascism after the end of the Second World War and gave Europe all of the freedoms that they currently enjoy, we gave them it. How is it at all possible that German workers, Italian workers, and every other workers have got better protection than British workers? It's disgraceful. It's because we've been under attack and will continue to be under attack. However, we survive. And we are still influential in all of the major sectors of the economy. You'll hear sometimes right-wing newspapers, and indeed I've heard right-wing Labour MPs say that, well, unions aren't relevant anymore. And I smile and think to myself, well, if we're not relevant, why do you keep attacking us? Why don't you allow us to wither on the vine over in the corner somewhere? They attack us because they know that we are the first and last line of defence for working people against unbridled capitalism and against bad employers. So we're prepared, we're used to being attacked, and we will survive. We're still the largest voluntary organisation in our society, and we'll continue to be that. And I'll finish on this point because it goes back to a question you asked before about Boris Johnson investing in these heartlands that he's won. It would be a clever move by Johnson to embrace trade unions, to talk to trade unions, just like his counterparts in the rest of Europe embrace trade unions in debate and discussion. It would be a clever thing for him to do that. If he attempts, like some of his predecessors, to attack trade unions, it could be the biggest mistake he's ever made, because we know how to fight, we know how to survive, and he'd be much better concentrating on working with unions to improve productivity, to defend jobs, to defend workers' rights, and to improve our economy.
Great, I think that's it. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.